and I'm ready to tell you all about the time I ran into a wendigo on the prairies of North Dakota. It was a nice September evening and the opening weekend of deer season, 2020, in Bottineu County. It had been a hard year and I'd looked forward to hunting for months, even bought myself a new deer stand in preparation for the hunt. It was the second day of the season, so according to North Dakota law, I was allowed to stay in my stand for half an hour after sunset. For years, it's been my usual routine to head out midday and set up my deer stand, then take the stand down just as dark starts creeping in. Years ago, my dad had taught me that the afternoon and evening were the best time to spot deer because they've come accustomed to the hustle and bustle of human life during the day and learned on their own to come out during the quiet parts of the evening when humans are usually scarce. I was pretty exhausted that particular morning. My cousin had for some reason planned her wedding for the same weekend, and I'd spend the night before tying one on with family and friends. When I climbed into the deer stand, I leaned back in my seat and yawned and stretched. I'd found a perfect quiet spot way out in the middle of an open acreage owned by a friend of the family who had given me permission to hunt the land. Off in the distance, I could hear the honking of Canada geese as they made their way south for the winter. Aside from them, I was completely alone out there. It was a perfectly clear and sunny afternoon and a comfortable high 60s in temperature. I had on my favorite jacket and a thermos of my grandma's hot cocoa to hold and enjoy, making the crisp and cool autumn air even more enjoyable. It's strange. When I first got up in that stand, I thought I was wide awake and ready for the hunt, even in spite of all the partying the night before. I didn't even realize I was falling asleep until I got woken up by the shaking of my deer stand. It was pitch black when I opened my eyes. I didn't know the time and was too panicked to check in the moment, but I'd later realize it was creeping up on midnight when I got woke up. I wasn't sure what was happening when I first got startled awake. It was clear that something was trying to shake me out of the tree, but I couldn't really place what it might be. There are no bears living in the area, and the musky smell of whatever it was far too strong to be that of a horse or a bull. I grabbed my flashlight from my jacket pocket and shone it down below me. Right away, I spotted a huge set of antlers. My thought was that it was a buck deer up on his hind legs trying to knock down the stand for some reason, but that didn't make a whole lot of sense. Deer are usually shy and skittish. There would be no reason for him to have suddenly attacked me as I slept. It wasn't all bad, though, because I had come out there to bag a buck, and there he was. I hesitated before reaching for my gun. It was well past nightfall and beyond the legal hunting hours, but I figured I had a pass to shoot this thing since it was actively trying to kill me, too. I pointed the barrel of the shotgun down right between the antlers and took aim, then pulled the trigger. It was only when the thing fell backwards did I realize that it was no normal deer. When it fell, I could tell that it wasn't built like a deer with a straight back and legs. Instead, it was almost cat-like in appearance with peaked shoulders and a thin waist. It shook its head at the feel of the bullet and then stood back up and looked at me. It stood on only the two back legs, like a human, and stared me right in the eyes. This thing was like nothing I'd ever seen before, but I knew right away what it was. The wendigo is a popular figure in Native American folklore, and my dad's a member of the Lakota tribe. I knew from the stories that they can't be outrun, and they can't be shot with regular bullets. They regenerate faster than they bleed. Fortunately, they also can't climb. I made my way further up the tree and took shelter for the night. By sunrise, it had completely torn my new deer stand apart, but as the sun came up, it got bored enough to leave. I made my way down and gathered up the pieces of the stand and carried it back to my truck. I never told anyone what had happened with the stand to cause it so much damage. When I got home and my parents asked, I just shrugged it off and said it wasn't well built, but I think my dad might have known. The next time I went out, he handed me a cloth bag with silver bullets and told me to be careful. Apparently, once a wendigo sets its sights on you, it doesn't give up. I'll never hunt without that bag in my kit again. As I learned, you never know when you might need them. I just left the strangest government job and I need to tell someone about this. 4 months ago, I got a job working on a government project. On the first day of work, about 50 other temp workers and I walked into a huge, empty warehouse. There were 6 men in suits sitting at a conference table with a projector aimed at the wall. We were told to gather around the conference table to have a meeting before getting to work. One of the guys in a suit stood up and gave a speech saying that from this day forth, we were heroes. He talked about the children's lives we would be saving by working hard and sending pallets of much-needed food to the places in the world that needed them the most. He went on and on about how every minute we waste is a children's life that could have been saved. He appeared to wipe a tear from his eye and leave the room. I'm pretty sure the tear wasn't sincere, but it set the mood for the rest of the 4 months. We all worked like animals, sending truckloads of pallets to the children in need. I worked as a forklift driver, and I didn't take a single break for the entirety of the time I worked. I would cram my lunch down in the middle of a bathroom break and get right back on the forklift and load pallets into the trucks to be sent off. The pay was pretty good for a temp job, but for a government job it seemed to be absolute chaos. If OSHA inspected our warehouse, they would have shut it down in minutes. We didn't wear any protective gear. We didn't have any breaks. We worked in a poorly ventilated warehouse without air conditioning in the middle of August. We didn't receive any training whatsoever. No food or water was provided. I could go on and on. Every night after my 12-hour shift, I would be so exhausted that I had trouble making the drive home safely. But the pay was good. About 3 weeks into the job, I got promoted to a management position. I was pumped because I got more pay, but I didn't know the first thing about how to manage an operation like that. The biggest perk was they brought in an air-conditioned trailer for me to do the paperwork in. The other workers looked at me with hate, but I couldn't complain. One day, a truck drove off the loading dock with a forklift driver still inside. The forklift fell off the back of the truck, and the pallet he was carrying crashed on top of him. I shut down the operation and checked on the forklift driver. He was in bad shape. He couldn't move because of the pain, and a bucket of chemicals that were in the pallet poured all over him and was burning his skin. As we were trying to help get him out of there, all 6 of the suited men ran out onto the parking lot. The one that did the presentation on the first day screamed at us for halting production. I explained to him that the forklift driver, we'll call him Peter, could have died and he needs immediate medical attention. The suited man had a breakdown that I was undermining his orders and was selfishly putting my friend's needs ahead of the poor children's needs. I was speechless. He screamed at everyone to get back to work, and they did. Peter died right then and there, and everyone just ignored him and kept working. The suited men pulled out rubber gloves and picked up Peter and took him into my trailer. They locked the door, and I didn't see them for the rest of the shift. We just closed the one dock where the forklift was blocking accessibility and continued working feverishly. I had never been in management before when there was an on-site injury, so I did some research and learned that the standard operating procedure is to fill out an employee's report of injury form. Thinking I was doing the right thing, I filled out all the information and printed it out to give to the suited man. The next day, I went to my trailer, and it was still locked. I knocked on the door, and immediately one of the men pushed me back and closed the door to the trailer. I handed him the form, and he immediately asked how many copies I made. I said just the one, and he asked which computer I used to make the form. I explained I used my home computer, and he immediately took me to his car and had me give instructions to my address. We pulled up to my house, and he followed me close behind as I went inside to grab the computer. He immediately grabbed my computer and threw it in the trunk of his car. I started yelling at him, and he gave me $2,000 in cash to get another one. My computer was only worth $300, so I took it. On the last day, I walked in, and the trailer was gone and the warehouse was almost empty. The only thing in there was the conference table and the suited men. I walked up to them, and they handed me an envelope with my last paycheck in it. They said that the project was top secret, and I couldn't talk about anything that happened here. I agreed and wished them the best. I walked outside and opened the envelope. There was a $20,000 bonus in there and a note that said, "Silence." The temp agency has me working for a pest control company now, so things have settled down drastically in my life. I do often wonder what we were sending off by the truckload and whom we were sending them. It wasn't food for children like we were told, it was some sort of deadly chemical, and I don't know who was ordering so much of it. I also don't like the fact that those people know where I live. And I don't scare easy. Maybe that's my ego talking, but I like to think it's the truth. The military humbles you, but it also teaches you what you're capable of. It teaches when fear is and isn't appropriate. 3 weeks ago, my fear was very appropriate. Unless I dreamt the entire day, there's no explanation for what I saw. There's at least no explanation that makes sense. I've gone hunting every season since I retired from the military. That's 10 years now. Deer, boars, elk, I've been up and down the food chain. I eat what I kill. I'm not a trophy hunter. You might not know I was a hunter, as a matter of fact, if you just came by my place some random afternoon. I don't keep gun magazines on the coffee table. My gun closet is tucked away in the garage, safely away from the eyes and hands of visitors. I don't talk about hunting. It's my personal time, get it? Out there, away from civilization with a rifle in my hands, it can be a comforting feeling. For better or for worse, the experience is calming. Usually. 3 weeks ago, calm was thrown out the window. I had recently moved my deer tower from its usual spot in the Okanogan forest. I set it up about 30 kilometers northwest. My only motivation was the change in scenery. In hindsight, that might not have been a good enough reason. Something found me out there. Despite all the camouflage and concealment, something picked my scent off the wind and came right to me. It hunted me like a fox on a hen. I was sitting in my little hen house, all warm and unprepared. It expected me to be an easy meal, I'm sure. If I'd been any less lucky that day, I probably would have been. I didn't hear it coming. That's embarrassing, but I didn't. I only saw it when it breached the tree line and sulked into the clearing. It was massive. I thought at first that it was a bear. Its fur was just too long, too thick and wild. When I aimed my gun in its direction, I saw the beast for what it was. A wolf, I think. A wolf larger than any animal I've seen in North America. It was looking right at me. It was looking at me and drooling. Starving, I could tell. I was shocked. I was appropriately afraid, I think. My rifle was not the caliber designed to take out animals of that magnitude. It kept coming toward the deer tower. I slid my finger onto the trigger just in case I'd have to shoot to keep the beast moving. The base of my tower was 10 feet off the ground. When that thing got close and stood on its hind legs, its front claws scraped the corner of the floor. I shot it, and it didn't flinch. It roared and sighed, almost annoyed, and it mauled the tree tower itself. It could have jumped up there, I bet. It could have joined me in the box and had me cornered. I don't know why it didn't. Maybe it was just playing with me. Maybe I made it angry and it wanted to piss me off right back. It tore through the legs in seconds. The next thing I knew, the entire structure was collapsing. The floor fell from beneath my feet and I went tumbling with it. I hit the ground hard, lost my breath. Most of the tower collapsed right on top of the wolf or the dog or the bear. I still don't know what it was, do I? The weight of the tower knocked it down, disoriented it. The bottle of doe urine I had with me busted open. The scent must have hit that animal like a whirlwind. It thrashed at the splintered remains of the stand and gave me just enough time to run. I made it into the tree line with my rifle in hand. I knew I couldn't outrun it. It was only a matter of time before it landed on my scent yet again. I turned around and used the side of a tree to steady my aim. I was still pretty shaken from the fall. I waited. I held my breath and I waited. I watched the wolf thing rake its claws through the earth, searching for the source of the burning odor. When its paws came up empty, it started to look around. I watched as it stood up again and realized a horrifying truth. Its body sat just as naturally upright as it did on all fours. It didn't struggle to hold its balance at all. It spotted me again. It huffed and it stepped toward me, this time walking on two legs. Luck found me again at that moment. If the wolf hadn't stood up, I would have been aiming at its shoulders and its back. On its hind legs, though, I could get to its stomach. I could get to somewhere important. When I fired this time, it yelped. I screamed with every ounce of air in my lung. I screamed until I was empty. It must have been enough. I watched the wolf turn around and flee in the other direction. I waited again. I knew I had to. I had to make sure that it wasn't circling around me, trying to approach from the flank. It took me 10 hours to make it back to my car. Every sound and movement put me on edge. I don't scare easy. I didn't used to, anyway. The more time that passes between that encounter and now, the more I want to know what that animal was. I'll tell you one thing, though. I'm not willing to go back to get those answers. I'm built for a lot of things, but hunting isn't one of them. I will take my rifle anywhere else in the world, but that monster can have Okanogan. I don't look for trouble or drama, you know what I mean? When I got my new truck camper rig set up, I just wanted to get into the woods and soak up the peace and quiet, especially considering all the freaking problems I had to work out to get the whole thing up and running. My first trip was heading out west to the Umpqua National Forest to get some relief from this insane heat we've been having. I got to know this guy on the internet who was always talking about these incredible crystals he was finding. They were unbelievable, stuff you'd see at gem shows for serious money. He was digging them out of the earth. Me and my brother were always rock hounding when we were kids. I love how you can find spectacular things for free if you know where to look. It took me a couple of 10-hour driving days, but me and my dog, Jack, made it to Grants Pass, Oregon, and got a hold of Patrick. You know, the internet guy. He was going to get me set up with a boondocking spot near Myrtle Creek, about an hour up north. We met up at the diner there for a coffee. Patrick looked like some kind of forest sprite with his green eyes and intense stare. He was shy and seemed out of place in town. He told me he knew places in the woods that most people were unaware of, because of his hobby of planting baby fir trees. He really got into the thick of things out there. He was driving this beat-up station wagon with the back half of the roof caved in. I followed him out of town until we accessed this creekside dirt road. Then we just kept heading west until we were surrounded by these enormous trees everywhere. I'm telling you, they were enormous, and it was like nothing had ever been there till we arrived. And besides the sound of the river, it was dead silent. You'd think with all those trees you would hear a bird or two. Not one bird sound did I hear. Patrick showed me a spot of level ground where I could park the camper and get settled in. He took a tool roll out of the back of the station wagon and unrolled it on the ground. There were hammers and chisels and safety goggles and headlamps and other things in there. He seemed to know what he was doing. He pulled 2 hooded black vinyl ponchos out of his backpack and whispered that I should put one on. That seemed weird to me. There wasn't any rain, but he whispered that it would keep us more concealed. I didn't understand, but I didn't argue. It was so shadowy and quiet, I already felt concealed from everything. But something about that place wouldn't even let you speak out loud. He was going to take me to one of his favorite spots upstream in exchange for me helping him list and sell his findings. I got Jack leashed up and ready to go, and then Patrick said it wasn't safe to bring the dog. Not safe? What did that mean? It was strange, but it was like Patrick was someone you didn't question. Like, why are we wearing ponchos? Why can't the dog come? Why is your car bashed in? I staked Jack out on his leash and we headed into the brush beside the river. Once you got in there, you could see a faint path. It was evening and I was kind of hungry and feeling grungy and sticky from sweating through my last 2 days of driving. But I knew Patrick had limited time, and this was really a rare opportunity to have such an experienced guide. The stream was really rushing along, but then we came to this spot where it widened out and partially flowed into a shallow cave. Patrick pointed at the cave like that's where we were supposed to go. We put on the headlamps and headed into the cave. It stank. It smelled like an unwashed human had been living there for weeks. But obviously we were off the beaten path of indigent camps. When Patrick started digging at the water's edge right away, he started uncovering these gorgeous crystals. I was stunned. How could something like that be so close to the surface? I dug in and felt like I was in a dream with these perfect specimens I was unearthing. The beauty and the odor really did not go together. I was immersed in my search. It was so dark and quiet. Then crash! Into the mouth of the cave burst Jack. He was yelping and howling and tearing at my poncho like he was possessed. He looked like a cat with his hair all standing on end. He dragged and dragged at me, pulling me toward the cave's opening, and then I heard the most unearthly whooping sound, and the stench became truly unbearable. Rocks started raining down at the opening of the cave. Jack was wild-eyed. All I could do was succumb to his pulling me outside. It was chaos everywhere, rocks and water and mud and howling, and suddenly my vision was filled by a brown, hairy mass of 10-foot-tall humanoid creature. It howled and swiped at me, and I ran. I just followed Jack blindly out of that hell pit and didn't stop until I got us both into the truck and locked the doors. Patrick followed shortly and slammed himself into his car and took off. I was stunned. Barreling out of those woods, I was unable to make sense of anything. My 30-pound dog had ripped his stake out of the ground to come find me and save me from what? Later on, I was reading about Bigfoot sightings in that area and wishing I had known that sooner. Some people even said they had used pheromones to tempt him out of hiding. I'm sure I was emitting some pretty ripe emanations that day after my lack of showering. But holy cow, I have no words. I am not looking for trouble. I never believed in the supernatural. Maybe that's why it's so hard for me to square away what I saw in 2006. It's like a black stain on my perfect portrait of faith. It's something I can't explain. I hope that you can. If not, maybe you can point me towards someone with a theory. All of my theories have run their course. Do you remember 2006? An ice storm came through central Illinois that shattered trees and encased entire houses. We had to chisel our way out the front door. The way I remember it, we got hit at the tail end of November or the first week of December. It's hard to say. Either way, for the next month, we were in a purgatory of ice. Then we got hit again in January. That one I'm sure you remember, since it wasn't exclusive to any one state. Most of North America felt that one. For a while there, it seemed winter wasn't going to end. Global warming had really come for us, didn't it? The ice melted, and we went back to our usual lives, forgetting that more than 70 people were killed by that ice. Is 70 a lot? It feels like a lot. Either way, this story isn't about those 70 people. Maybe it should be. I know we've had storms just as bad since then, and it never feels like the country is really prepared. I don't want to get into politics, though. I don't want to talk about how much of our taxes go toward crisis spending, and I definitely don't want to debate the existence of global warming. I don't drink myself to sleep every night trying to forget that the ice caps are melting. I'm trying to forget what I saw. We had a few weeks to prepare, right? A few weeks when we all talked about the weatherman and doubted that his predictions of record-setting low temperatures would come true. We doubted him, but we emptied the stores anyways. We all do a bit of panic shopping, don't we? We hear we might be stuck indoors, and suddenly all we can think of is hoarding as many resources as we can. Stock the cupboards, fill the fridge, stack the cans in the basement. It was right after Thanksgiving. I remember because I was looking in the fridge, trying to decide whether or not my leftovers would carry me through the storm that was coming. I decided to grab a few groceries in the middle of the night just to be safe. I didn't count on the main roads being closed. I didn't count on the detour keeping me out so late. I certainly didn't think the storm would arrive while I was behind the wheel. It did. I ended up parked on the side of the road. My hazard lights reflected in the falling snow and ice, illuminating the area around me one beat at a time. Each time the light blinked on and unveiled the world around me, the road and the fields were covered by more freezing white. I was being buried. Luckily, by then I had grabbed my groceries. I zipped up my jacket and worked my way through a candy bar. It turns out stress eating can't save you from a blizzard. I started the car to run the heat and recharge the battery. As the engine hummed back to life, my hazard lights briefly stopped blinking. There was a pause in the rhythm. It was brief, only lasted for a single moment while the car fired up and remembered all of its responsibilities. But in that brief moment, before the hazards and the headlights could shine, another light blinked back at me. I cut the engine immediately. I pressed the triangular button that toggled my emergency lights and held my breath. Whatever blinked at me, it came from the sky. Helicopter? Not in that weather. I rubbed my eyes and took a deep breath, telling myself that the stress was overwhelming me. All the shadows from the storm had caught me by surprise. When I looked back through the windshield, the light blinked again. This time it was closer. This time I saw where it was coming from. A disc, easily the diameter of a train car, was floating above the road. It didn't move. It didn't make a sound. The wind and the snow and the ice didn't seem to touch it. The smooth black surface was unmarked by the winter. From my position on the road, I could only make out a single obstruction on its polished circular frame. There was a large indentation, also circular, facing my direction. It felt like I was looking at the hollow socket of a skull. It felt like there was an eye there, something watching me that I couldn't see. The light blinked again, shining from that indentation and blanketing my car. It swallowed the vehicle, blinded me. I felt the frame rumble and grabbed my steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Something lurched underneath me, like the car was being lifted from the ground. I swayed in the mean winter wind. Then I fell. I worked as a janitor at a high school in Atlanta, Georgia, and there was a small graveyard across the street. I thought it looked pretty old. I never bothered to go look at the gravestones until I had a reason to. For the first month, it was a normal job. I come in around 3 after school's done for the day and clean until 8 or so whenever I finish up. It's pretty boring, as you can imagine, so I usually listen to podcasts or music, whatever I'm in the mood for. As it happens, when things started to get strange, I was listening to a mystery podcast, probably because it was around Halloween. So I'm listening to this creepy story, and I turn around with my mop in my hand and trip over this white cat. We get a lot of stray cats around here since the winters are so mild, but I hardly ever see a white cat, especially one like this that was all white. It was long-haired and well-fed, looked like a pet, not a stray. I thought it was probably just visiting, wandering around or whatever, and it would go home soon. When I left, it walked out and down the street, cool as you please, toward the graveyard. It disappeared into the graveyard, but I was sure it couldn't live there. I thought it must have gone to one of the houses behind it, since it did look well cared for. I didn't expect to see it again, but it showed up again the next night and trailed me for my whole shift. Now, I thought it had to be lost or astray. I took a picture of it and put it up on the lost animal social media pages, just in case. When I went out to my truck to go home, it went off toward the graveyard again. The day after that, I brought a can of cat food with me, and when the cat showed up, I opened the can and put it in front of it. The cat just walked away from it. I thought maybe it didn't like the food, so I brought some tuna next time. Every cat likes tuna. Not this one. I still didn't think there was anything weird about the cat, though. I hadn't figured out what was going on. No, I just thought someone else must be feeding it. But if that was true, then why was it hanging around? Sure, it was a little chilly outside, especially at night. But if it was cold, why did it always leave when I did? Maybe I thought it wanted attention. So I decided I'd try to pet it. But every time I reached down, it managed to sidestep and avoid my hand. I kept trying, though, and finally I got it cornered. It wasn't scared like it didn't hiss or anything, but it gave me a look. As if it was saying, "Do you really want to do this?" And I reached for it, but my hand went right through. I couldn't believe it. I reached out again and it sidestepped. That was when I had the thought, this is not a real cat. Okay, so what was it? And what did it want? I felt like it wanted something because it kept coming around and following me. Not food, not attention, so what? I felt like it was trying to tell me something. Every night it walked back toward the graveyard. So one night I followed it. But when I got to the graveyard, it walked behind one of the stones and was gone. Since I was already there, I started to look at the stones. They were kind of messed up, dirty, and so on. But it was dark, so I couldn't really read them. I looked around, trying to figure out where that cat could have gone. There are a couple of houses past the cemetery. I guessed it must have gone to one of them. I tried not to think about the fact that it looked like it had just disappeared. I couldn't help it, though. I kept thinking about that cemetery. Finally, one Saturday, I decided to clean it up. I loaded up the truck with everything I thought I'd need. Weed trimmer, bleach, cloths, a pressure washer. I'd never cleaned gravestones before, but I cleaned everything else, so I figured I could handle it. I wasn't out there 10 minutes before people started showing up to help. One lady even brought flowers to put on the graves when we were done. I asked a few people if they knew anyone who'd lost a white cat. No one did, but a couple people said they'd seen one hanging around the graveyard. Never during the day, though, only at night. When we were done, the place looked great. Before we left, I took a look at the stone the cat had disappeared behind. The name didn't mean anything to me, but an old guy behind me said, I knew him. He was a janitor at the school. I saw that he'd died in 1955 at the age of 72. On Monday, the cat didn't show up. I kind of missed it as I cleaned. I mean, it never did anything except follow me around while I worked, but still, it was some kind of company. I found myself looking for it every time I finished cleaning one room and started another. When it was time to leave, I stood outside for a minute, looking toward the graveyard. Finally, I saw the cat walking toward me. It didn't come all the way, just up to the sidewalk. It meowed, the first time I ever heard it do that. Then it went back to the graveyard. I never saw it again, but once every few months I go over to